Oh, go for it.
You guys are closed down too?
Online, yeah. Everything's online.
Yep.
Hello.
Oh, hey. Adios.
Welcome to history class. Is everyone okay? Let's see. Some of us are still waiting to come on. Welcome. How is everyone doing on this fine St. Patrick's Day?
Good.
Yes, excellent. Good to see all of you. All right. Awesome. Well, we will go ahead and get started today. We are talking today about Vietnam. So this is going to be a pretty busy chapter. There's going to be a lot of moving pieces, a lot of countries fighting and then stopping their fighting and fighting again. So we'll do our best to kind of keep up with it all. We've got a couple of main players though, so kind of at the end of the class, we want to come away with some solid knowledge about Ho Chi Minh, as well as what he did for his country, Vietnam. So I like one of you is named Hester Prynne, so fabulous. When we get to English, we'll talk more about her. But for history class, before we dive into the reading today, let's kind of think back to some of the other countries that we've been talking about and tell me what are kind of the patterns we've been noticing in the post-World War II war. What have these different countries, what's been happening to these various countries? I'm thinking South Africa, India, in Palestine and Israel, in Egypt and Germany, China. What's been happening? Raise your hand and I will call on you.
Jasmine, come put away your bowl.
Any ideas? What have been some of the themes in the countries we've read about in the post-World War II era? So for example, in India, Gandhi and the Indians wanted Great Britain out of there so they could rule their own country. And then there was a lot of inter-country conflict between the Muslims and the Hindus, so they partitioned it, split it up, and now we have two different countries. In the Middle East, we had Israel and Palestine. They couldn't get along, so what did they do? They separated them into two different countries. In China, we just read about, we had Chi Shek and the people who wanted a democracy, and then we had Mao and the communists, and what did they do? Again, split up the country. Taiwan became a democracy, whereas China, mainland China under Mao, communism. We also read about South Africa. We had the Dutch National Party and the African National Congress. Again, two competing governments in the same country, all vying for power. So kind of the theme that we're starting to understand here is that after World War II, it was not just, oh, everyone's happy and getting along now, the war's over. There was a lot of conflict as countries that before didn't have a lot of power and a lot of agency are starting to say, hey, Western nations, get out of our country so that we can run and govern ourselves. So that is kind of a nice preview of what we are going to see happen in Vietnam. So if you have your books with you, that is awesome. We are going to be in chapter 33. However, if you don't have it, do not worry, I've got it for us right here. So give me a sec and I will pull that up.
I don't have any dots.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, call the boss, Jasmine.
Can everyone see the chapter here? Yes? Thumbs up, fabulous, love it.
Yes.
Sweet. All right, awesome. And while we are reading, we are going to refrain from chatting. Thank you. Don't worry about taking notes on this chapter. There's a lot of information. So what we're gonna do, we'll just read through it together. I might pause here and there just to make sure we're all tracking together. And I might call on you to read, so please be prepared for that. But I'll start us off. We've got Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh. By the time World War II ended, France had lost all of its Asian colonies. Oh, what page you're asking? We are on page, oh, it doesn't say there, 363, if you have your book at home. And just to let you guys know, there are plenty of books here at the temple. If you have a chance, you can stop by during the school hours and give you one to take home. But if not, I'm going to do my best to make sure the resource is online as well. All right, here we go. By the time World War II ended, France had lost all of its Asian colonies. Remember, the French had built a little empire in French Indochina, the land that today is held by the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. In French Indochina, French landowners and a few wealthy Vietnamese held most of the power and money, while most Vietnamese worked for them for very low wages. The Vietnamese patriot, Phan Boi Chau, had tried to drive the French out, but he had failed. So, kind of to set the scene, we have the same idea that we've been having in other countries, is that colonized people wanted their colonizers out of there. World War II changed French Indochina. When Germany moved into France and occupied it, Germany's ally, Japan, moved into French Indochina. Beginning in 1940, French Indochina was under Japanese rule. The Japanese let the French officials stay in power, but as in Vichy France, the officials had to obey Japanese orders. To the Vietnamese, this seemed like a good chance to make another bid for independence. Can I have Johnny, can you please start reading? So we're right here, the rebellion. Johnny? Can you start reading? Oh, microphone is broken. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Awesome. In that case, Lily, can you please start reading?
Sure.
Awesome. Just a paragraph.
The rebellion that rose up against both the Japanese and the French who obeyed them was led by a man named Nguyen.
Win.
Hmm?
That's pronounced win.
Oh, Nguyen
You're good. I Kwok.
I Kwok. He was probably born around 1890, although no one knows for sure. He used 15 different names for himself, but the name that made him famous in Vietnam was Ho Chi Minh, who had enlightened.
He who enlightens. Thank you, Lily. So think back to our friend Mao in China. He had parades thrown in his honor. He had people worshiping him, literally singing hymns to him. So Ho Chi Minh, if you caught that, who gave him the name He Who Enlightens? Ho Chi Minh gave himself the name that means He Who Enlightens. So it sounds, he tried a bunch of different names, but this is the one he landed on. So we have another very charismatic figure in charge here. Even when he was a child, Ho Chi Minh hated the French occupiers. He could see that in their own country, the Vietnamese had almost no power. They worked as servants and field hands. The French treated them with scorn. Before he was 10, Ho Chi Minh was working for the resistance movement in Vietnam, carrying messages from one anti-French fighter to another. His family also resented and worked against the French. His father refused to speak the French language. His sister stole weapons for Vietnamese freedom fighters, and his brother joined a resistance movement. So what does this remind us of? They worked as servants and field hands in their own country. What other country had people who were natives of that country and yet had very little power? You can go ahead and answer either in the chat or unmute yourself. Native Americans, very true. We haven't learned about their history recently though. Chinese, possibly not the example I was thinking of. Think about a country that they established their own government, but then the other government wouldn't even publish newspaper articles about them. They really tried to suppress them. South Africa, awesome, thank you. So in South Africa, right, the African National Congress, the Black people who lived in South Africa, they had no power. The Dutch colonizers, they had all of the influence, all of the political sway, and made the people whose land it actually was work for them. So again, a lot of the same tension. Now, tell me either in the chat or you can unmute yourself, how old some of our people in the class are. How old are you guys?
12.
12? You got 14. You're not 4. Okay, another 14. I was like, you're not 4. 13. All right, did you catch how old was Ho Chi Minh when he started participating in political activities?
Yeah, can we just show you like?
He was 10, exactly right. 10 years old. So from a very young age, this guy has a lot of passion for his country and is not afraid to start acting, even though he was very young. All right, so we are going to pause the chat now and keep reading. When he was 21, so a little bit older than you guys are, Ho Chi Minh decided to leave his country. He took a job as a ship's cook and sailed away from Vietnam. He would not return for 30 years. In those years, he visited countries all over the world as his ship moved from port to port. He lived for a little while in London, and then in Paris, and then in New York. He began his own newspaper, writing articles that called for every country in the world to be free from foreign occupiers. He visited Russia, read the writings of Lenin, and joined the Communist Party. That's going to be key. He organized the Vietnamese living in China into a resistance group called the Revolutionary Youth Organization and started the Indochinese Communist Party. He became more and more convinced that if Vietnam were ever to be free from France, it would have to fight for its independence. In 1941, when Germany occupied France, Ho Chi Minh saw his chance. Surely the French occupiers would now be at a disadvantage. He returned to Vietnam and proposed that different revolutionary groups working secretly against the French all unite together. Ho Chi Minh and the Indochinese Communist Party would lead all the other patriotic groups in resisting the French and the Japanese. The other Vietnamese agreed. The new rebel army, called the Viet Minh, was commanded by Ho Chi Minh. Over 10,000 Vietnamese joined the Viet Minh. They spent the years of World War II fighting a guerrilla war against the Japanese, appearing from the brush of the jungles, attacking, and then melting back into the wilds. So we've got the world is a little distracted with World War II, and Ho Chi Minh sees this as a great opportunity to start pushing those countries out of Vietnam. And did you catch it? What were the 2 countries, and you can go ahead and answer in the chat, what were the 2 countries that they were trying to get out of Vietnam? France, absolutely, and there's one other country that had its hands in Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh was trying to eradicate. Not Germany, necessarily. It's another Asian country, actually. Japan, fabulous, thank you. So we've got both the Japanese and the French in Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh and his army are working diligently to get them out. Specifically, they're using guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare, if you haven't heard of that before, instead of traditional war where you've got like one army on one side and the other army on the other side kind of clashing, this is when you're hiding in bushes and up in trees, you're undercover, and it's a lot harder to know where you are, how many of you there are, and it's a lot sneakier. So it's a very difficult kind of army to fight. All right, we will keep going. So between 1940 and 1945, so during World War II, not only war, but also famine turned Vietnam into a place of death. Crops failed. Nearly 2 million people starved to death. And for part of the time, Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh had to fight without him. He had gone to China to ask Chiang Kai-shek, and that's the one we read about last week, so the democracy leader in Taiwan, to help him fight against the Japanese. But Chiang Kai-shek, who was busy fighting the Japanese himself, didn't trust Ho Chi Minh because Minh was a member of the Communist Party. And remember, Kai-shek does not like communism. Later, he's not gonna like Mao. He threw Ho Chi Minh in jail for 18 months. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh had begun to spy for the Allied forces, giving the Allies news about the plans and movements of the Japanese in Asia. Being on the side of the Allies, even though the French, their original occupiers, were allies too, seemed like the best way to get the Japanese out of Indochina. So they're like, all right, we're gonna pause our disagreements with the French, we're gonna get on their side to push the Japanese out, and then probably pretty soon we'll press play again on our dislike of the French. But in war, sometimes loyalties change. So finally, Chiang Kai-shek agreed to release Ho Chi Minh. By the time Ho Chi Minh got back to Vietnam, World War II had begun to turn against Germany. In Vietnam, the Japanese had decided to change the way Vietnam was governed. Since the Allied troops had driven Germany out of France, the nation of France was no longer under German control. French officials could no longer be trusted to cooperate with and access power like Japan. So all of the French officials in Vietnam were arrested and removed from their positions. The Japanese decreed that Vietnam would be ruled by a puppet emperor, Bao Dai, but the country was really under Japanese control. So Vietnam controlled by the Japanese. This puppet monarchy would only last for 5 months because Japan was close to surrender. When Japan surrendered to the Allies in August 1945, after the bombing of Hiroshima, the Japanese had to give up their control of Vietnam. Bao Dai, Japan's chosen emperor, had to give up his throne. Can I please have Fiona, can you unmute yourself and read?
Am I unmuted?
Yep, we can hear you. You're good.
Where do I start?
On September 2nd.
On September 2nd, 1945, Ho Chi Minh announced, your camera is it's on the page. Can you scroll up? Can you scroll up on the page?
Is that better?
Well, your view is on the words.
I think you might have to adjust that since that's not the case on my screen.
Oh, there.
Is that better?
Yeah. On September 2nd, 1945, Ho Chi Minh announced to a huge gathering of Vietnamese in the capital city of Hanoi that Vietnam was now a free country called the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The new Vietnamese Declaration of Independence was based on the American Declaration. It began, "All men are born equal. The Creator has given us inviolable rights to life, liberty, and happiness."
Awesome, thank you. Just a few months after the surrender of Japan, the French moved back into Vietnam. So they were gone and they back again. They wanted to try to rebuild the empire they had lost during World War II. Although they didn't immediately attack the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, they announced that they were reclaiming the southern part of Vietnam. It would no longer belong to the Democratic Republic. Instead, the South would be a separate French-controlled colony known as Cochinchina. Ho Chi Minh didn't think that the Vietnam could win an out war with the French. He offered to allow the French to put military bases in the Democratic Republic of Vietnam as long as they promised to leave the Democratic Republic alone to rule itself as a sovereign country. But the Vietnamese didn't trust the French, and honestly, can we blame them? The French didn't trust the Vietnamese. In 1946, France and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam declared war on each other. So did you catch that? 1946. What year did the World War II end? You can tell me in the chat. Yeah, 1945. So literally a year later, and we are back in another war. We're back in another war. Ho Chi Minh called to his followers, let him who has a rifle use his rifle. Let him who has a sword use his sword, and let those who have no sword to pick up axes and sticks to fight. So that totally makes sense coming from a man who started fighting when he was only 10 years old. Whatever weapons you have, he was like, fair game, let's go. So this is the French Indochina War, and it went on for 8 years. In the South, the French put Bao Day, and he's Japanese, back on the throne, announcing that he would rule over a southern Vietnamese and French country. The Vietnamese refused to recognize him and went on fighting. French troops grew weary of fighting against Vietnamese guerrillas who could slip easily through the brush and jungles, which makes sense, right? Because it's their country. They know the land better than the French do. Finally, in 1954 rather, the French agreed to give up their claim to Vietnam, but they would only surrender under certain conditions. They insisted that Ho Chi Minh divide the country in half. This is starting to sound a lot like what other countries? Dividing the country in half. Go ahead and answer in the chat. Germany, absolutely. Remember we read about East and West Germany. We haven't gotten to Korea yet, but yes. Not Belgium. What other countries have we read about that divided in half? Yeah, China. So we had Kai-shek go to Taiwan and Mao was in mainland China, absolutely. What about India? I'm thinking India that became Pakistan and India. Or we had Israel and Palestine. So we're really kind of sensing this theme. All right. So the northern part would still be the Democratic Republic of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh as president, but the south wouldn't belong to France. It wouldn't belong to the Democratic Republic either. Instead, it would be a separate country with its own elections and a different president. And Ho Chi Minh agreed to these terms, and Vietnam was finally free of both France and Japan. But the decision to divide the country in two would turn out to be a disaster. Again, we've seen this, it's not a huge surprise. Struggles between the north and south of Vietnam would continue for another 21 years and would lead to yet another foreign country, ding, 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 the United States, fighting a war in Vietnam. So stay tuned because we will get there. There is a lot more to come in Vietnam. So awesome job. Thank you for reading that through with me. So I know there was a lot of information in that chapter. We had the French who were kind of in and out of the story, and then the Japanese were in and out of the story. But kind of the main idea we want to take away from that is Ho Chi Minh became a communist and decided, this is what I want for my people in Vietnam. We don't want any other influences. We want to govern ourselves. A lot of war, a lot of strife, a lot of conflict over these various political ideas. And right after World War II, I mean, they just finished fighting this giant world war, and then boom, 1 year later, French Indochina War. It's kind of nonstop during the 20th century. So to kind of help us wrap our brains around all of these various people and figures, we're going to watch a quick video. Sometimes it's nice to have a nice visual cue. So let me pull that up for us. And then we'll talk about our Google Classroom as well.
In the spring of 1919, as the victorious Allied powers met in Paris to rebuild a world shattered by the Great War, President Woodrow Wilson headed the American delegation, housed in the Hotel Crillon. One day, a tall, slender, 29-year-old man appeared with a petition for the president he and other Vietnamese nationalists had written. Inspired by Wilson's declaration that the interests of colonial peoples should be given equal weight with those of their European rulers, the man was asking that this principle be applied to his homeland. The president's secretary promised to show it to Wilson, but there is no evidence that he ever did. His name was Win Tat Tan, but he was now living under an alias, Win Ai Quoc, Win the Patriot. During his long, shadowy career, he would adopt some 70 different pseudonyms, finally settling on the most enlightened one, Ho Chi Minh.
Ho Chi Minh was a man who succeeded in projecting an image of somebody who was totally dedicated to freeing his country and his people from foreign domination, to the point that he sacrificed his own well-being, his own life, not having a family of his own. To Vietnamese, that's a big sacrifice, because to us, everybody needs a family.
Ho Chi Minh was born in 1890, the son of a minor official in the French regime. After taking part in a demonstration against the puppet emperor and the Frenchman who pulled his strings, Ho was expelled from school and marked for arrest. He left Vietnam in 1911 and remained in exile for 30 years. He served as a cook's helper aboard a French liner and visited New York and Boston, where he worked for a time as a pastry chef at the Parker House. He shoveled snow in London, tinted photographs in Paris. There, Ho Chi Minh joined the French Socialist Party, but when he discovered the anti-colonial writings of Lenin, he became a communist. He was invited to Moscow to study, underwent training as a Soviet agent, was sometimes criticized for being a nationalist first, a communist second, and then was dispatched to China to organize a cell of other Vietnamese exiles and help establish the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Through it all, he was taut and quivering, a friend remembered, with only one thought: his country, Vietnam. By 1940, much of the world was at war again. Germany had seized most of Western Europe, including France. Imperial Japan threatened many of the European colonies in Asia and occupied Vietnam, where they permitted their allies, the collaborationist French, to continue to oversee their colony. To some Vietnamese, the coming of the Japanese seemed to signal a welcome end to white colonial rule. But Ho Chi Minh, still in exile in China, saw the Japanese as alien invaders, no more welcome than the French. They were only interested in exploiting his country and seizing Vietnamese crops to fill their own rice bowls. The time had come, he said, to rally patriots of all ages and all types, peasants, workers, merchants, and soldiers, to defeat the Japanese and the collaborationist French. In February of 1941, after 3 decades away from his homeland, Ho Chi Minh slipped back across the Chinese border into Vietnam and set up headquarters near the remote village of Phuoc Ba, in a limestone cave at the side of a mountain he named for Karl Marx, overlooking a jungle stream he named for his hero, Lenin. There, he founded a revolutionary movement, which he called the Vietnam Independence League, the Viet Minh.
All right. So go ahead and either in the chat or unmute yourselves. What were some key things you took away from that video? So it reinforced a lot of what we learned about in our reading, that Ho Chi Minh traveled a lot, went to different countries. He had a lot of different jobs. I mean, everything from a pastry chef to a photographer. And he kind of soaked up a lot of ideas, and what really stayed with him was communism. So that's why we watched rather, that Karl Marx, he named a landmark after Karl Marx, who was kind of the founder of the idea of communism, as well as Lenin, who was with the Bolsheviks in Russia. So these ideas all kind of came, and then he brought it back to his country, getting rid of the Western influence, getting rid of other Asian influence, in this case Japan, to establish communism in Vietnam. So what were some things that kind of jumped out at you guys? I'd love to know. Let me get the light here. Anybody? All right. He had a lot of aliases. Yes. So in our book, it said 15. And then in this video, I think it said 70 different names he went through. Like, no, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. And he landed on Ho Chi Minh. Does anyone recall, what does Ho Chi Minh mean? Yes, man of enlightenment. So I'm getting some Mao vibes in terms of, like, he thinks very highly of himself. He thinks very highly of the ideas he has come to share with his people, right? So a man of great confidence. And that totally fits with what the other people were saying about him. Like, wow, that guy, he was always like really high strung, very passionate, and very passionate from a young age. Yeah, a big ego, absolutely. He had this idea and he went for it 100% all the time. Awesome. Anything else from the video? So yes, he did some cooking. He was a pastry chef. The secretary didn't tell that one dude about him. Gonna have to be a little more specific. A river, not Lemon, but Lenin. So Lenin, and we haven't talked about Russia as much during this time period, but right kind of around the World War I time, Lenin came to power in Russia, and he was a communist, which, hey, Ho Chi Minh is a communist. He was inspired by Lenin. No, not Lenin like the Beatles. That is different spelling, very different person. But nice try. Anything else from the video or from the chapter? And you guys, I know this chapter, it totally bounces around a lot. We've got France kind of in and out of the picture. We've got Japan in and out of the picture. There was a famine in Vietnam. How many people did that famine kill in Vietnam? Do you remember? Anybody? Not 10, it was 2 million, which is a ton of people during World War II to die simply from the crops failing. So again, a lot of conflict and strife during this period. Yeah, 2 million, good. And how many years did that French Indochina War last? Do you recall? So we got World War II happening from 1939 to 1945, and then we have a 1-year little break, and then boom, 1946, France, Vietnam, start a war. How long does it last? A lot, yeah. No, longer than 2 years. It was 8 years. Yeah, 8 years more of fighting. So that gets us all the way to 1954. And then pretty soon we'll learn about the Vietnam War from the American perspective, which is coming up. So the conflict in Vietnam is not over. Just because they've separated into North and South, things are still not going to be peaceful, unfortunately. Yes, it is a lot. You're totally right. It is. So we are going to jump now to our Google Class. And I gave you guys the code earlier on the chat, but it's kind of far away now, or like way up. So you don't have to scroll. Let me grab the code for you. This is going to be a really awesome resource for you to use. It's where we'll have class discussions and, oh, your grandpa served in the war. Very cool. Yes, thank you for posting that. There it is. So that is what you're going to use to log on to our Google Classroom. The video that we just watched will be posted there. I've already got the chapter that we read posted there. And I'm sorry, the scanning was a little wonky. I'm going to try to get better at scanning the pages so it's not so like bent. But that's where all of our resources are going to be. So there's no outline for today, but a lot of times we like to outline the chapter just to make sure we kind of get all of the key ideas. But for today, I'll kind of show you what the questions are going to be. And these questions, you're absolutely welcome to start now. And then they won't be due though until Thursday. So Thursday, I'll kind of go over and see what your answers were. It was very exciting. So let me pull that up for us now. There it is. So this will kind of what it'll look like for every chapter. So this one, Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh. So you'll see that's the video if you'd like to rewatch it. That is the actual text. Oh, and side note, if you want the actual book, we have plenty of copies of them here at the temple. So again, you're welcome to stop by and pick up a copy during school hours. And here is your first question that you will be answering. Oh, so I see a couple of you have already joined. Fabulous, thank you. So question 1. So Ho Chi Minh began his political activism at age 10, younger than everybody in this class. His activities even got him expelled from school. As a minor who could not yet vote, what are some ways you can get involved with the country's politics? So I'd love for you to take, just in 5 sentences, answer. What are some ways that, yeah, you can't go out to a voting booth quite yet, but there are other ways for you to get involved. Hopefully ways that aren't going to get you expelled, like Ho Chi Minh. So that will be the first question. And then, yeah, so that's what it'll look like for you. And then the second thing you will answer here. Let's see, scooch this out of the way. Good question. In China, Mao liked to be worshipped by his people. In Vietnam, as we talked about, Ho Chi Minh gave himself a name that means the enlightened one. So we don't sing hymns to our political leaders or put on parades for them necessarily, but we do show them honor in disrespect and respect in different ways. So 2 questions here. 1, have you seen people in your life show respect or disrespect for politicians? So you'll answer in 5 sentences telling me, yes, you know, maybe your parents or your neighbors or family friends. Give me some examples about how you see people showing respect or disrespect for our political leaders. And number 2, who else in our society do we worship? So again, we're probably not singing hymns to them necessarily, but we can show reverence in other ways. Who do we spend time talking about, gossiping about, taking pictures of, sharing pictures of?
Ryan, I don't really want her to. I'm
Zach,
sorry, no. I'm sorry, I just don't want them to break.
Can you mute yourself if you're talking and not asking a question? Yes, I will show the first question again, but you should have access to it on your Google Classroom. So tell me, who else in our society in the United States today do we worship? And how do we show them that kind of reverence? So let me go back then to, yeah, so this is the first question. So this is the first one. I think that's what you wanted to see. So we have a couple minutes before we go. I'd love to kind of have you start generating some ideas. Go ahead in the chat. What do you think? What are some ways you can get involved in the country's politics? And thank you for those of you who are already jumping into the class. Petitions, protests, rallies. Watching the news, absolutely. Voting, although you can't vote quite yet. So until you turn 18, what are some other ways, aside from, yes, directly casting a ballot, that you can vote or that you can get involved? So Ho Chi Minh, he was only 10 years old and he figured out a way to get involved. Yeah, protesting. You could go to a protest. And who from our previous lessons was like the master of nonviolent protests? Gandhi, yeah. So Gandhi, what were some of Gandhi's techniques that he used to protest non-violently in India? Fasting, that was definitely one of his techniques. And we haven't talked about the civil rights movement in this class, but just from your own knowledge, how did other civil rights leaders in the United States decide to protest? Marches, emotional speeches, definitely. I'm thinking like Martin Luther King Jr. What were some of the boycott? There we go, absolutely. Boycotts, sit-ins, so where you go to like a diner that's maybe not serving people who are Black and just staying there until you're served. All those are nonviolent protests. Yeah, sitting in the back of the bus like Rosa Parks. So those are all great ways, great examples of nonviolent protests and ways to get involved politically. A sit-in, good, yeah, absolutely. And what do we think about guerrilla warfare? So that's the kind of warfare where you don't have like one army and another army kind of clashing in the middle and it's just people who have been trained specifically to fight. Guerrilla warfare could be young people up in trees, kind of snipers hidden where you're not expecting them at any time of day, kind of no rules. So it's not very gentlemanly. Like in the Revolutionary War, they would frown upon that kind of thing. It wasn't playing by the rules. It's interesting, but unorganized, totally unorganized. And sometimes that was even helpful because if the other side has no idea when you're gonna strike, it creates an aura of fear. So you're always kind of looking over your shoulder, you're always nervous. It's chaos, absolutely, yes, absolutely, it can lead to chaos. It might lead to a lot of civilian death, right? If you're fighting kind of in unconventional areas or where there's people milling about, could lead to chaos in that way. Unpredictable, totally unpredictable, which again, might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. So there's a lot more of moving factors that are out of your control in that case. And it really helps if you know the land, right? So we read that the French obviously didn't know the landscape as well as the native Vietnamese people. So they had the advantage of knowing, ooh, this is where that river leads to, or there's more flora and fauna over there, or, you know, we know kind of just the general lay of the land, how long it will take to get from point A to point B. So all of those are kind of advantages they had in their own territory. It's different spelling of gorilla, so not, ooh, gorilla, the animals, but I know it is a little confusing at first. But yeah, I don't want you to picture a bunch of gorillas, the animals fighting, guerrilla warfare, G-U-E, as opposed to G-O. All right, so you guys should all have access to that Google Classroom now, which is awesome. Go ahead and take your time after class to write out your answers, and I'll be very excited to read them. So now I know most of you are in our English class. We will be starting that class at, I believe, 1:15 p.m. So you've got a few minutes of break, and I will see you then. Thanks, everybody.